This podcast is sponsored by Bigger Brains, online training that won't bore you to tears. Expand the minds of your workforce at getbiggerbrains.com.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Kelly Vandever, and my special guest today is Mary Kay Pratt. Mary is a freelance journalist who reports mostly on business and technology management with a focus on how organizations use technology to reach their goals. Her work appears primarily in Computerworld and TechTarget, but she also contributes to the Boston Business Journal, the MIT Technology Review, and for the article that led to this interview, CIO Magazine. Her CIO article was titled, Why IT Projects Still Fail. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but welcome, Mary, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, as you know, we usually start with a couple of quirky questions to get to know our guest a little bit before we dive into the content. So my first quirky question for you is, what is your favorite possession?
I would have to say my snowboard is my favorite possession. I, first off, love the design. Snowboards have just really cool graphics, and mine just totally fits my personality. It's black, shiny, sparkly on top with this kind of pastel floral swirl pattern in it, and then underneath is this powder blue floral pattern, and it's called appropriately. I think it's Snow Jam Floral Spice, and it was a totally spur of the moment purchase. I took up snowboarding very later in life, not late, I should say. I'm not that old. But I gave my oldest son, who was around 9 or 8 at the time, I said, pick skiing or snowboarding. I'd skied all my life, and he picked snowboarding, and I thought, oh, this is so exciting. I'm going to learn as well. And thought I'd be great at it because I skied, and took our first lesson together and fell flat completely, the whole lesson, just falling. And I became very committed to doing this. I wanted to master snowboarding, and in the interim had another child. I had my fourth child in this whole journey. And while I was grocery shopping one day and my kids were all at home with my husband, I stopped by a ski store and saw this board and fell in love with it and bought it. Bought the whole kit and caboodle. Hired the sales clerk who does private instruction to teach me, and spent 2 winters first with her and then with other private instructors, getting to the point where I could get down a mountain slope by myself without being terrified, and now do both snowboard and ski, and I am very proud of that. There are not a lot of as many women snowboarders, and very few people can switch easily back and forth, and I'm still a better skier, but really committed. And I think because of this feeling of always being challenged physically, mentally, and in all those good ways, always pushing myself. And that snowboard kind of encapsulates all these different things. Plus, it's just way cool and awesome to be out on a snowy mountain and sub-zero temperatures. So I am very pleased and proud and love that possession. So that's what I love.
What a cool story, and what a cool answer.
Yeah, and if you saw me, you would not think of me as a snowboarder in my, little business attire, talking about IT technology and ROI, and then being out on the slope with my, rockin' snowboard.
Well, I get the same looks too because I ride a Harley. So.
Oh, good for you! That's next on my list.
Oh, cool. Well, once you ride a motorcycle, it's like, but I haven't skied or snowboard, so I don't have the comparison. Very cool, very cool. All right, well, tell us something surprising about yourself that most people don't know.
Well, that's always a tricky one because I feel like there should be a lot of little things about myself that aren't visible. But I think one of the ones that I would say is, and again, I think it goes to our private lives that aren't part of our public persona. But I'm really interested in the spiritual world as well. And I'm active with my church, and I'm in my church vestry, and I actually read the Bible cover to cover, and Apocrypha, and it's not really a spiritual exercise sometimes as much as an intellectual one and a historical one, and reading all this and understanding. I think even today in a religious sense is understanding what was written, because so much of the dialogue and division today stems from people's understanding of these religions. And I don't want to get into a right or wrong, or right interpretation or wrong interpretation. I think it's really a journey, and it's very complex. But in this era where so many people like to cite this document as a basis for what they believe and why they're making the decisions, I thought it was really important to read it and understand it. And there's so many more questions that are raised from having done that. And for me, it's very fascinating, especially being a wordsmith in both formal settings and informal conversations, understanding the language, the original language, and the interpretations, how the words mattered then, what the words meant then, what they mean today. And next on my list will be some of the other spiritual writings of the other major religions. So if I could go back and take classes on all this, there's so many levels and layers to learn. Again, the historical pieces of it, the geography, when they're talking about all these movements of these tribes. The Middle East, it's where are they today and what's still there, and the archaeological pieces of it. It's a whole other world, and so fascinating and so intriguing. And that's how, if I'm not on the ski slopes with my kids, sometimes that's what I try to find time to do. And I think that's something that, again, not often part of our public life is this kind of personal spiritual persona, but it is an important part of mine, and really does help guide me in how I go through my daily journey, so to speak.
Fascinating. Well, I feel like I could talk to you for hours about these things. but we had an agenda for today, so
switching gears completely into another more modern topic.
Exactly. So, I guess the next question I want to ask you is about how did you come about, whether it's the first time or what got you into this whole technology, and how that was important, and the focus of your writing around how organizations use technology to reach your goal.
Yeah, I fell into it, which is probably not the smart answer to give, but it is true. And it's funny because and I am a journalist, and I really consider myself a reporter and a journalist first. And I did come up through daily newspapers, and there's actually a funny story with that too. I got into journalism because I really felt this desire to, I had this, idealism that most of us, I think, have in our teen years, that, if only we could expose what's not working and understand it and learn from it, then we can be better. And I do still believe that. I think the world is on the right track. We have our bumps and bruises, but I think we're certainly way better today than we were 200 years ago. But I did have this really, kind of this mission-driven idea of what journalism could be, and thought I'd be covering the world and politics and everything else. It didn't work out that way, and that's totally fine. I think part of the idealism is probably a little bit of naivete as well about what it took to actually get to those things and the sacrifices to do that. Like I said, I have 4 kids. I don't think traveling around the world and doing that would have jived with having a family as well. But so anyways, I came up through newspapers, and as part of that, ended up on a features desk, and business was part of the rotation of the coverage, along with health and fitness and science and some of the other things. So I covered business. And back in the early 90s, when I was at a newspaper, and again, kind of starting in this business focus, I remember going to the executive editor at this time and saying, "So tell me about this World Wide Web I keep hearing about." Because back then it was very academic. We did not have email on our computers. We did not have any internet access. We thought fax machines were fast, and we put up with the rolls of paper, which is really beginning to date myself. But what technology was and how we worked with it was just so completely different. And we're beginning to hear in this business world about this World Wide Web thing that was coming, and I really, I'd had an Apple computer in my shared apartment. It was my roommates, actually, going through college, but really it was just, technology was just so different back when I started. So anyways, I did some more business reporting, continued to work in, I was on the wire desk for a while, so handling international and national news coming in. And when my first child was born, I started to freelance, and went into business, really specifically freelancing in the business realm, and because technology became such a driver around 2000, that was the dot-com boom, if you remember, where we got away from dial-up to high-speed internet. It began to really change how businesses could operate, as well as users and society in general. So from covering business, it became, there were more and more stories about how our businesses harnessing technology and then technology management. And that was really the rise of the CIO and this idea that IT professionals were not this, basement back office kind of, they were moving out from, kind of the servers and the data centers to understanding how do we harness technology to do something for the business in a new way and to drive that. And, and quite honestly, newspapers have faced incredible disruption because of it as well. Yeah. So even within my own industry, and I don't think the dust has settled on all that. I still think there's a little bit more shake up and shake down to kind of settle into what the new paradigms are in a lot of industries, including the media. So that's how I kind of came into it, but it was really, and I think, just kind of close this all up, is I think that's one of the joys of journalism is every day I learn something new and I have an opportunity to be a little bit on the forefront of what people are talking about and to maybe pick a path that will take me in a new direction because the skill sets are the same. You're talking to people, interviewing them, understanding what drives them. So it's a good fit for me because I always love that challenging my mind and my thinking.
Very cool, very cool. Excellent. Well, I would like to shift gears a little bit now to talk about that article. So,
sure.
So I'll have a link to it in the show notes. And the title of the article and the teaser, I think, are what drew me in. But the article was titled "Why IT Projects Still Fail," and the teaser said, "Despite new methodologies and management techniques meant to head off spectacular failures, critical technical initiatives still fall flat at an alarming rate." So, what drew you to this premise that, despite things are changing, IT projects are still failing? What drew you there?
Well, it was in conjunction with my editor at the time, so I don't want to take full credit for this, but I think it's just in conversations that we have and continue to have on how all the pieces of the IT fit together, what the role of the CIO and his or her staff is within the organization. In all these conversations, their priorities, their budget, their resources, their skill sets, all of this centers around how do we, again, drive this organizational objective. And if that's the metric, they're not always reaching that. They're falling short. And I think that goes to the story's idea about why they still fail. The goal line has changed a little bit. And I think that still that affects why they're still failing, as well as some of the traditional reasons why they've failed. But I think that what drew us to the story is that it's a conversation we hear our audience members having as well. These IT professionals, they still experience it within their own day-to-day lives, professional lives.
Well, and what I found interesting too was that organizations are redefining what that failure is.
Yes, definitely.
Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. Well, there's kind of the classic, and I don't think it's divided up. I don't think they put it in a bucket. Oh, it's a classic IT failure, and it's a new IT failure. But that would be interesting if they did. But there are new ways they can fail. And the old one still exists. I think, again, looking back at the breadth of my professional experience, what IT failure had once meant is they didn't update overnight or, on the weekend or whenever it was, and we came into work and the computers would not turn on. And that has happened. And I think anyone who's been in business long enough, remembers that. Mm-hmm. There were days where you could just not log in. It was broken. And that was what an IT failure had classically been. It technically did not work. And if it powered up and did what it technically was supposed to do, then it was considered a success. And it didn't really matter as much in this kind of classic or older IT environment what the user experience was or perception of it was, or the length of time it might take a user to either learn it or work through it or what have you. If it was just if the system powered up and the code ran, it was successful. And then if it did not do all those things, it was a failure. So that still exists. There are still certainly this kind of classic IT failure. It just, you put go and it does not turn on and do what it technically should. That is still definitely a problem. But today, what a failure can mean is much more around this business objective or organizational objective. So it could be for government or nonprofits or, across the board. And so sometimes I'll use business interchangeably with the larger scope of organizations. So it may technically work perfectly. The system turns on. You did not break your computers. The user can log in with no problem. But it is either clunky, so the users don't want to use it. They'll revert to either an old way of doing it, or they'll find a workaround so the system doesn't do it, or it does not deliver the expected benefits, whether it is driving new revenue or saving time, or it didn't solve the problem it was meant to solve, providing a higher level of security, or creating a new workflow that would bring data from point A back to a repository that could then be used for analytics that would drive another piece of the organization. So there's a lot more places and boxes to check off for success. And any one of those that doesn't get checked can then say it's either a failure. And if it's a big enough box, if it was the main driver for the project in the first part, you could have say 9 of the 10 boxes. But if that last one was the big one, then it's a failure, and all the other 9 are kind of like, oh well, he kind of tried. So what defines success, and therefore what defines failure, has expanded significantly.
Well, and I also got the impression from the article too that it may have met the initial objective, but then the business priorities shift too.
That is true. That can also happen, and that I feel for the IT folks because I've covered them a long time, and they can do everything right, and sometimes, and they could be in great communication with their partners on the business side, so to speak. And if one person who has that visibility into a changing objective does not go back and share with the IT team that change, then it's like did you see the movie Hidden Figures about the right and one of the women is saying, she's like, it's changing so fast, like every time I do my work I throw it away. I need to be in the room to hear what you're saying because I can get to work and I know what the current objective is. So even though I kind of put it on the business side in a little bit in that prior response that they don't go back and tell IT what the changing objectives are, it still goes back to this kind of classic IT problem of lack of good communication within the organization or siloed behavior, because it's still incumbent on IT if you're knocking on the door and saying, I need to be in this meeting, and I deserve to be in this meeting, I should be in this meeting. And in the most mature organizations, IT is calling the meeting and making sure that what they have on the docket is still a reflection of the current objective. So that's definitely another place where that could cause an IT failure or a failure in an IT project, is not having that current list of objectives.
Okay, so you talked about the failures that come from not understanding the business priorities, and IT should make sure they're in the room and getting that. Was there other types of failures that are or more unique to this time frame as opposed to the classic IT failures, and is there some avoidance that organizations should be doing around that?
In terms of modern ones, I think there are still places where IT misses its mark because it's not listening to the users. I still think or based on my research, it's not my personal opinion, it's based on the research, that there still can be a disconnect between what IT thinks it should deliver and what the user community really wants. And it's a hard thing. It's a real push and pull. IT can get enamored by the newest technology, and not understand what the business really needs to achieve and why. Good communication, that still seems to be a really high-level need within the organization, and IT understanding what the business does, what drives the business, what drives revenue in the organization, how workflow happens, how technology needs to fit, and how processes need to change to take full advantage of a project. So even if IT gets a lot of these pieces right and delivers, if there's not that kind of last mile to change a work process to take advantage of the technology, it could deliver some benefits or advantages, but maybe not the full amount. And I think, too, again, putting some of this back on the business, is that the business needs to understand the limits of the technology, and that it still takes some training and some adjustment and the willingness to adjust to get the benefits. And that, again, goes back to being partners. I think that's a term you hear IT talking about and stressing a lot, is being partners with our business. Good communication to articulate all these, setting expectations. I think business has this idea, and whether it's because of all the hype that can come out around the coverage of new technologies, or a lot of the sci-fi coverages, or the promise of AI, they think technology is going to be a panacea, like, oh, this is a pain point in our business, and if we just install this new system, it will go away. Sometimes, maybe, but setting the expectation of, like, it will help, but you have to do X different, and it will be better, but you have to be committed to doing it. So those are the dynamics. And again, it's not a clean-cut answer, because it's really nuanced about what failure is and what success looks like, and what it takes to get there in the organization around these IT initiatives. But that seems to be much newer. Again, 20 years ago, it was like, if it turned on, we were good.
Well, and you used an example in the article, too, about a group of leaders who were on board with a change, but then when it came to their team, I think it was a sales team, they wouldn't use the software. The sales team refused to use the software. And, and that
happens.
Yeah, and hopefully not as much.
And I think another sign of failure is because some of the technology can be bought or without IT, and that people have individual non-technical staff has IT skills, that they can sometimes go out and purchase or implement or tweak systems based on their own desires that may not fit in with the organizational IT infrastructure, might go around some of the security measures that need to be in place. It might take data outside the organization, which in addition to be a cybersecurity risk, is also maybe it pulls away from this kind of single version of truth that's so important for good analytics programs within the organization, that leads to that feeds into the AI programs that the organizations might launch. And so again, you kind of get these workarounds or standalone programs that might work for this organization, but not necessarily good for the organization as a whole. And that might roll up into that's kind of a failure in IT, maybe in a different way, but that's kind of a new problem that IT has to contend with too, is these shadow IT projects. And again, there's a lot of nuances around that too. There's some freedom to do those, and some concerns around those, and probably a whole other podcast right there.
I was just thinking the same thing. Well, I wonder if we could go back to the Agile approaches, because a lot of the appeal to that was that you're moving to the highest priority, and you're moving faster, and so that hopefully you're putting things in place before the situation changes, because business changes so much these days. But in your research, is there any good news about Agile? Are those approaches more effective? Do they help lessen the impact of failure?
Yeah, Yeah, they definitely do, and I think there's a lot of good news around Agile. But again, it's a nuanced answer. It's almost like an answer with an asterisk after it. Yes, but so we'll get to the but in a minute. But yes, Agile definitely helps, and Agile is one, and DevOps, and these kind of methodologies, and they're kind of fuzzy words because different people have different approaches. But basically, it's this idea that you're doing, instead of this monolithic waterfall project where we take the requirements and we go off and build something over the course of whatever, weeks or months usually, or even a year plus, and then kind of launch this big thing at the end and hope everything not only turns on, but works for what the users want, and it's still current with business objectives. That's kind of the old ways, and there's still a reason why some of those projects exist and need for them and everything else. But many, many more projects are doing something completely different, is breaking it up into these little chunks, and delivering them in these quick spurts, and just okay, we'll get this new feature out, we'll get this new function out, we'll do this quickly, see if it works. And it's not just that they're breaking it down into these little bits, but they're using newer technologies and processes to deliver these things. So automation within the IT process, you're testing the code. So you're going to avoid, say, or the theory is that it helps avoid maybe bad code and human error and some of the things that could cause the kind of classic IT failure, like, oh, the code is bad and it doesn't work, and our systems are blown. It's we don't see those kind of the whole computer system crashing anymore with these, but there can be the hiccups. And so the automation that has come in with Agile and DevOps helps avoid some of those problems. And in addition, because it's a smaller, more immediate project, it can be much more current to the organization's needs, much more responsive to what needs to be done, sometimes that day or that week or that month. So you're much more current with what the business objective is at that moment. And because it's done with this in this way that business and developers and operations people are working on an equal playing field, the feeling is that, and without getting too much into what DevOps is and how it works, but this idea that we're taking in the current needs, what the user wants, how it's really going to work when it's rolled out, that you can have a successful launch and have it quickly, because all of this is wrapped up into the process instead of being kind of linear. We did A and now we move to point B and hope we don't have to go back to point A to fix it because point C is now changing. So it helps smooth out some of the bumps that can come up in classic development processes, and you get to find out much quicker if it's going to work or not. And because it's such a smaller piece it's a small piece. If it doesn't work, it's very easy to recover and reset and move forward. So it doesn't feel like a failure. And a lot of organizations it's given them permission to innovate way more because it's not seen as a failure, but a learning or a test environment. So you do hear things like, and I don't think this is a new statement, but this kind of fail fast. Okay, well, we'll try it, and if we fail fast, it's okay because we're not wasting a year in a project now. We maybe took a day and found that it doesn't work the way we want to, and it's a quick, easy way to take what we learned and try again tomorrow and be better tomorrow. So again, I know that's a very nuanced answer to the question. I don't think any of these have a real yes or no, black or white answer. But that kind of helped mitigate some of the failure, how failure is actually viewed around IT projects and in the organization, and that's a good thing. That's really positive because it allows for the innovation and failures, and it's going to be part of innovation, right? It's you can't innovate with and be afraid of failure at the same time.
Right. So is that part of the asterisks, or was there more for the asterisks?
Well, there's and again, it's nuanced. There are some other pieces to DevOps and Agile and this fail fast and innovation, and we can't really talk about that without talking about things like cloud, because the ability to rapidly develop and to put out pieces of a project, this kind of Agile and DevOps thing, and doing this in small chunks. A lot of this really relies on the ability to access cloud, because it doesn't take a lot of time or actual dollars to provision servers. And so this gets into the real kind of techie piece of it. And I don't want to go too deep into that, but because it is fairly inexpensive and very quick to now get a server provision to do some of this work, to test this work and do all these things before launching, and then actually to launch this new feature or function that IT is developing, either in-house or in conjunction with an outsourced provider or even a SaaS provider. I mean, all these kind of things. It makes it dollar-wise easy to do, right? It's not a big line item anymore. Like if you had to go buy a server and set it up in your data center, I mean, that just took time. Right. So the investment in this project and the cost of that failure, if it doesn't work out, the resources that you put in this old infrastructure model were just higher. So in that way, it's really good, right? You know, it's like it doesn't cost as much to fail, so it's easier to fail, and that's good because it feeds innovation. So all that is positive. The asterisk comes around. Failure can say, you know, you could fail doing that, and your line item might not be much. But on the other hand, you might miss a big opportunity because your project failed, and that project was meant to capitalize on something happening very quickly in the market. And I'm trying to think of a positive thing. Okay, I was thinking like some of the, kind of the political action that's been happening. But let's stay away from that and talk about maybe like some of these, like I'm in Boston, so we've had a good string of championships over the past 10 years or so, and staying away from the politics of some of that around the Patriots and the like. But the idea that you might have this event happening, say the Patriots on the duck boats coming through Boston, and when is it, February or March, in a celebratory. Maybe you're the Boston Tourism Association or whatever it might be, and wants to capitalize on this event by launching some great app that someone can use to walk around the city and celebrate and hit all your favorite clubs and bars and restaurants and get all your cool Patriot gear. So, yeah, that can be done very quickly, and we can try it and do something really cool with it. But if it's not right on the day it needs to launch, you might have blown, maybe you've blown $10,000 in a day of your developer's time. Okay, that's not a big deal, but you might have lost, thousands or even millions of dollars in potential revenue. And that's kind of the asterisk. So it's not that it's okay to fail, and that's where that but comes in. But there's still sometimes a bigger cost that needs to be factored into that. And that lost opportunity cost still puts a lot of pressure on business and IT to get the project right. Yeah. And that's the balance. How do you balance that? Yeah, it's okay to fail, but... And I think that goes to something in the article once that, one of the people I talked to, and I think this is echoed through the research both for this story and others, not all IT projects are the same. And even if they're being developed in the same manner, even if they are costing the same amount in real dollars or resources or time, the consequences for these projects, different projects, can vary significantly, and IT and the business needs to be aware of that, and that is something that good leaders are aware of, and the ones who struggle are the ones who don't recognize that, or recognize it but don't have the communication skills to express that to their colleagues, to say, this has to be the priority, and so your smaller, less consequential IT project just has to take a back seat. Yeah. You're not going to get that new function today, because even though it's quick and easy, and the one we're doing is quick and easy, this one we cannot get wrong, and yours we can, or yours we can wait on. And that is somewhere where a lot of IT leaders still, a lot of IT and business leaders together struggle with kind of setting that priority list and not knowing that. And that's not across the board. Some are doing it well, some are doing it well a lot of the times. I'm certainly not the insight into every organization, but that is key, I think, in understanding this new environment and where failure fits in and where success needs to happen.
Very good, very good. Well, was there any other good news based on your investigation that you any other pleasant surprises maybe that would be interesting for folks to hear?
I think the acceptance of failure is interesting, and again, and that's been there. I think you've always heard people say it's okay to fail. I think because the cost of failure is coming down, it's not just lip service anymore. And with the new technology and the new processes, the development methodologies, things like that, it's easier to allow for failure. And I think, again, the flip side of that is that basically means there's more permission to be innovative, to try something and see how it works. And because in this quick hit kind of mentality, a failure isn't always, it's rarely as catastrophic, or the potential for a catastrophic failure has gone down. And I say that, but again with a caveat, because one of the and this was surprising in the conversation. One of the people I interviewed did talk about this methodology and this kind of new way of development. You may go through this whole process and you put out these little pieces, these chunks, and these, a feature here and there, rolling it up with the idea that, like, as it all gets rolled up, it's going to be transformative as a whole. And his view and what he had observed is that sometimes all these small components individually work well, but when it's rolled up as a whole, it doesn't work well. And that is still a potential for a catastrophic failure, right? So even if you have these components, and his analogy, and I thought this was an excellent, was it's like treating the individual symptoms. You got your fever under control, or you quelled the nauseous, feeling that you might have in a sick patient, but you didn't really treat the illness. You're just treating the symptoms. I think that was kind of what he was getting at. And I thought that was a really surprising observation that not others had. It seems logical and one that that people should be on guard for, because he did say he saw it enough to note it, and whether every CIO or IT leader has seen it or not, the potential for that, I think, is real. That type of failure is real, where the pieces work individually but not as a whole.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, Mary, I feel like I could talk to you all day.
It's an interesting topic, so definitely one that keeps CIOs working hard around the clock, I think.
Very, very much so, yes, absolutely. Well, Mary, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your research and your insight and sharing that with our audiences and in the articles that you write. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Permission to Speak. If you want to increase collaboration and innovation in your organization, check out more resources available at speakingpractically.com, or give me a call, Kelly Vandever, at 770-597-1108.